This will easily be the most selfish thing that I have ever preached or taught. And I do so this morning unashamedly. For 3 months, the thing that I heard more than anything else was that I'm praying for you. And I can just tell you from my experience that God did incredible things in me and I think in our church. For the last month, the thing that I've heard most is I'm proud of you. And I want you to know that God has used those words to encourage me and to affirm His calling and direction in my life and in the church. But those words also scare me to death. Because I wonder, are we praying as much as we were before? What I do not need to hear from you is you are doing a good job, as much as I need to hear we are so desperate for God to do what only He can do that I'm calling out to God on your behalf. I need you to pray for me. My family needs you to pray for me. Our church needs you to pray for me. And could I suggest this morning that you need you to pray for me? I want to invite you to turn with me in your Bibles to Exodus chapter 17. Exodus is the second book of the Bible. The word Exodus means to exit or depart. It's the story of how God's children, the Israelites, left the bondage of slavery in Egypt on the way to the promised land, a land that was promised to have milk and honey. It was a land of abundance, a land of blessing. But in the meantime, they spent 40 years wandering around in the desert that we know as the Sinai Peninsula. Now, this was an incredible time that God's people had, as God perfectly provided for them. This bread-like substance called manna that rained down every day, literally from heaven, provided for them perfectly. The story before what we're going to read, God made water come out of a rock. He led them over this time by a pillar of cloud at day and fire at night. And so it was a great time. And I kind of feel like our church is in that period right now, in the wandering period. God has done great things, and He's provided for us perfectly. I was thinking this week, this is the closest thing to manna that I've ever experienced, because I think that God has given me just what I need for this day. I don't know what's happening next week, but I know what He has for today. And I think it's enough for us. And yet, I don't believe we're in the promised land yet. But we continue to follow the Lord. As the Israelites were wandering around in the desert, they were dealing with issues as they arose. But pretty much everything was fine until Exodus chapter 17, verse 8. And let's read what happens there together. The Amalekites came and attacked the Israelites at Rephidim. Moses said to Joshua, "Choose some of our men and go out to fight the Amalekites. Tomorrow I will stand on top of the hill with the staff of God in my hands." So Joshua fought the Amalekites as Moses had ordered, and Moses, Aaron, and Hur went to the top of the hill. As long as Moses held up his hands, the Israelites were winning. But whenever he lowered his hands, the Amalekites were winning. When Moses' hands grew tired, they took a stone, put it under him, and he sat on it. Aaron and Hur held his hands up, one on one side and one on the other, so that his hands remained steady till sunset. So Joshua overcame the Amalekite army with the sword. Let's think through this story together. We first see in verse 8, everything changes when the Amalekites attack the Israelites. The Israelites were under attack. Now, this would not be their last battle, but it was the first battle after they left the bondage of Egypt. They were attacked by the Amalekites. The Amalekites were descendants of Esau. They were descendants of Amalek, who was the grandson of Esau. So they were a nomadic tribe, and so they too were wanderers in this desert. The problem was they'd been there a lot longer than the Israelites. This was their territory. And now all of a sudden, these God people are trespassing on their territory. And so they come under attack. Next, we see that God called Moses to lead his people. Moses was the leader. We see this story start in Exodus chapter 3. This is where the story of the burning bush, where the bush is burning, but it's not consumed. And there, God introduces himself to Moses. He shows Moses who he is. He reveals himself. He says just what we sang. He reveals himself as I am. I am who I always have been and always will be. I am the eternal self-existent one. I am, in your Bibles, it says all caps Lord. When it says all caps Lord, that's talking about God's covenant name to his people, Yahweh or Jehovah, same name. All that's meaning the same thing. Yahweh, Jehovah, all caps Lord. It's his covenant name. God has revealed himself to Moses. This is who I am. And in this conversation, God lets Moses in on some stuff. He says, I have heard my people's cry, and I have come to rescue them from slavery and to lead them to the promised land. But here's the quote that gets Moses involved, and I am sending you. We know through the story of Exodus that God used Moses to do all of these things, to deliver his people from slavery, to lead them to the promised land. God used Moses to bring about the 10 plagues in Egypt, which led to the delivery of his people from slavery, which led them through the Red Sea on dry ground, led them through the desert. God used Moses as he perfectly provided manna and water, and God used Moses to give them the victory. All of this using something specific that Moses says here in Exodus chapter 17, the staff of God. That's what he calls it. The staff of God. Now, after offering every excuse in the book as to why he should not be the one that God sent, God finally said, fine, what's in your hand? What was in Moses' hand was his trusted friend as a shepherd. For decades, he had used the staff for everything. But God said when he had this staff, which Moses calls the staff of God, throw it down. So I want you to see, Moses did this. He released what was in his hand. Now, the craziest thing happened when he threw the staff down. The staff became what? Snake. The staff that Moses had used for years all of a sudden transformed into a snake. But as crazy as that was, something crazier happens next, because God says, all right, now I want you to pick up the snake by the tail. Now, I don't know a lot, but I had a feeling about this not being right. And so I did what all of us do. I went to Google to get the answers. And I don't know if Moses had access to wildliferemoval.com, but I did, and this is the page that I found. You see there, snake safety tips. I Googled, should you pick up snakes by the tail? And this was the first hit, so I didn't go any farther than this. Beth, can you zoom in a little on that? All right, I want you to see the very first thing at the top of the page, snake safety tips, in all caps. Leave snakes alone. Thank you. So, but that's not good enough, because God told Moses specifically to pick this snake up by the tail. And so if you would continue to read in this same article, wildliferemoval.com, they sound like experts. Quote, you should avoid picking up a snake by the tail only. End quote. So if I'm Moses and God tells me to pick up what used to be my staff but's now a snake by the tail, I'm good, God. I was needing a new staff anyway. I was looking into them earlier. But I don't know if Moses had enough faith or if he was ignorant, but he reached down and he picked up the snake by the tail and it turned back into his staff. He calls it the staff of God. It's this staff that God began to use to do all of these miraculous things. Now, when I think about the staff, it reminds me of something very important, that God uses ordinary things to do the miraculous. This was just a stick. And that's encouraging to me because this morning I'm looking at a lot of ordinary. And I know you're looking at ordinary. And yet God did miraculous things. It's through this staff that God was talking about, Exodus 4:17, when he says, take this staff in your hand so that you can perform the signs with it. And God used this staff to help Moses lead a different kind of flock. No longer was he needing to lead the sheep. He was leading a congregation of about 1 million people with the staff of God. Moses became the world's very first megachurch pastor. And it led them to the first battle in Rephidim as Moses provided the leadership and Joshua executed his plans. Next, what I want you to see is this, that Moses' leadership directly affected the army. As long as Moses, this is crazy. Did you hear the story? As long as Moses held the staff up, Israel was winning the battle. But when the staff in his hands were lowered, the Amalekites were winning. Israel winning, Amalekites winning. Say it with me. Israel winning. Okay, I was just good. Yeah. Amalekites. Amazing that the success or the failure on the battlefield was determined by Moses, who was up on a hill with Aaron and Hur and what he was doing with his hands. I wondered, the Bible doesn't tell us, I wonder, do you think the army, the soldiers that were fighting, were paying attention to what Moses was doing? I don't know. Do you think they saw that when his hands were up, they were winning, but when his hands were down, they were losing. They were getting injured. They were getting killed. If they did see him, do you think they would be interested in what was happening up on the hill? Absolutely. If they did notice, I think they would have one eye on the Amalekites and one eye on Moses, saying, come on, hold up your hands, hold up your hands. Because what he was doing was directly affecting their lives. It's a life and death situation. The last thing I want you to see in this story is this, that Moses required help from others. He couldn't hold his arm up all day long. The battle lasted until sunset. Now, the most incredible athletic feat I have ever seen in my life, personally, was a few years ago. Shelly and I went to an NCAA basketball tournament game. They had one of the weekends came through Birmingham, and Oklahoma was playing in it. So Shelly's from Oklahoma, we're Oklahoma fans, and so we went to see Oklahoma play. When you go, you get two games with one session, and so one game was Oklahoma playing somebody. The other game was Louisville playing somebody. Now, the Louisville Cardinals. If you're a Kentucky fan, you hate Louisville, right? Well, I watched them play. The most incredible athletic display I've ever seen. But it wasn't on the court. It was actually their mascot, the Louisville Cardinal bird. Now, it took us a few minutes before we realized what was happening. But once we did, it was incredible. I don't even remember the basketball game, but I remember this bird because the entire game, he was flapping his arms. Literally, the entire game. He never stopped. People would come up and take pictures with him. He would let them do that, but he wouldn't stop flapping his arms. Our seats were such that we could see into the tunnel where the basketball players went in and out of at halftime. And so I was able to watch the bird go out the tunnel at halftime when nobody else could see him. And he continued to flap his arms until he went out of my sight. The entire game, I don't know, 2 hours, 2.5 hours. I'll just let you know right now, you can test it at home. My shoulders are really burning right now. And he did that. It was incredible. 2 hours. Now Moses, holding up a staff all day long. Now I just go ahead and say, I know Moses, even though he was really old at the time, I know he's a lot stronger than I am. But I just wondered for myself, how long could I do this? How long could I hold up a staff? And it was about 5 minutes, honestly. You laugh, you try it yourself. 5 minutes, and my back started hurting, and my hands started shaking. And so I'm just saying, North Highlands, fight quick. It's not going to be long. And so when he got tired, I don't know if it was 5 minutes or 5 hours, when he got tired, he had with him these two guys. He had with him Aaron, his brother, and Hur, possibly the son or the grandson of Caleb. And when they saw that Moses could no longer hold up his hands with the staff on his own, they took over. They brought him something to sit on. And when he literally couldn't hold his hands up anymore, they got under him, Aaron on one side, Hur on the other, and they held his hands up for him. And as long as they did that, Israel won the battle. He couldn't do it on his own. It says there that his hands remained steady with them holding them till sunset. And they won the battle. Now, I see us in this story. I know that the situations are much different, but God is the same. And for the next few minutes, I want you to know that I'm looking at what God was doing as we make these applications. The first is this: we are under spiritual attack. We have a very real enemy whose expressed desire is to steal from you, kill you, and destroy you. And let me just say, your enemy does not have skin on. If you are fighting people, flesh and blood, you are fighting the wrong battle. And quite frankly, you're probably losing the spiritual battle. Listen to what Paul said in Ephesians 6:12. Our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against rulers and against authorities and against the powers of this dark world, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. If we knew who our real battle was against, we wouldn't have time to fight each other. We're under spiritual attack. 2 Corinthians 4:4 calls our enemy the god of this age or the god of this world. This world is, for the time being, for this age, his territory. And so like the Amalekites, he sees us as the God people as trespassing on his territory. And he's attacking us. I've been hearing really exciting things about how the Lord is moving in some of your lives and what he's doing over the last weeks and months, and that's awesome. How do you think the God of this world feels about that? We're in a spiritual war. We're under spiritual attack. Second, God has called pastors to lead his people, the church. I can identify with Moses, but I don't say that in a prideful way, not the way that I see Moses. I can identify with Moses because he didn't have the perfect resume. He was a murderer. He was self-conscious. He didn't want to speak in public. He wasn't looking for the job. He asked God to send someone else, and he heavily relied on others. I can identify with that dude. And yet God clearly showed up and told him what to do. And God used Moses, not because of who he was, but in spite of who he was. God used Moses because he could get the most glory through some nobody like him. The story of Moses is this: only God could do that. And it is my prayer that that could become my story. That at the end of this journey together, 20, 25 years, whatever, only God could have done that. God called pastors to lead his people, the church. Third, the pastor's leadership directly affects the lives of the congregation. I am quite certain I will never be able to get over this fact that God could use me to impact your lives for eternal purposes. Are you kidding me? Just as in this physical representation in Exodus chapter 17, as men lived and died based on whether Moses' hands were raised or lowered, there are spiritual battles that will be fought in the life of this congregation, and there will be victories that will be won. Some part, at least, by the spiritual leadership of this church. That's certainly been true of my life. Just like the army cared about what Moses was doing up on the hill that day, what his condition was, you ought to care about what my condition is. If I was Satan, I would target spiritual leaders. If he's as smart as I think he is, I would say there's probably a bigger target on my back. Because I believe he thinks that if he can affect the life of a spiritual leader, he can affect the entire congregation. A pastor's leadership directly affects the lives of a congregation. Fourth, pastors require the help of others. Obviously, this means there are practical things, and many of you do that well, but I'm not talking about those practical things necessarily that we might first think of. First and foremost, what I'm meaning here, most importantly, is prayer. When you pray for me, you hold my hands up. There will be many times when I don't have the strength and I don't have the ability and I don't have the wisdom and I don't have what it takes, and it will only be your prayers that lift my hands up. I know this. And I'm convinced that this has been my experience over the last few months. Charles Spurgeon was known as the Prince of Preachers. He was a Baptist preacher in England in the 1800s. He's been quoted all over the place many times from this pulpit. And there was one occasion when some American pastors went to go hear him preach at his church, and they caught him before he preached and asked him the question, "What's the secret to the success of your ministry?" Because in the 1800s, there were tens of thousands of people that were just coming at a time to hear this man preach. Amazing. There's no telling how many thousands of people are in heaven today because of how God used this man. He was an incredible preacher. And these American pastors caught him and said, "What's the secret of your success?" That's a good question. I would ask him that. Charles Spurgeon took these American pastors to the lower level of his church and opened up a door where he revealed over 400 people praying. And as they listened to what they were praying, these people were asking for God's blessing and power to rest on their pastor. And then he told them this: "This, gentleman, is the secret of God's blessing his work here." Charles Spurgeon called these prayer meetings the boiler room. At this time in the 1800s, steam was produced in the boiler room, and it was the power source of the day. It was the power source that gave power to everything. And the application here is obvious. Prayer is the power source that drives the activity of God on earth. Prayer is the power. It's not me. It's not my words or skills or ability or our programs or our money. No, prayer is the power. Charles Spurgeon said this: I would rather teach one man to pray, the Prince of Preachers. I would rather teach one man to pray than 10 men to preach. I echo what the disciples said to Jesus in Luke 11:1. Lord, teach us to pray. The application should be obvious for today. Pray for your pastor. Pray for your staff. Pray for your spiritual leaders. And here's a couple of ways I want to ask you to do that. One is tonight, I want to really invite you to come back, because tonight our pastors are going to be here on the stage, and out of all the ministry experience that we have, we're going to tell you specifically what we would like for you to pray for us. Okay, so come back tonight. Another way I want to challenge you is this. Many of you prayed daily for me, and you've said that. I thank you so much for that. But here's what I'm asking. I want to make sure we're covered in prayer, and so I'm asking you to commit one day a month to pray for your pastor, to pray for your staff. Out in the atrium on this side, there are some sign-up lists that have simply the day of the month, 1 through 31. If you would commit to saying, on this day of the month, I will pray for our pastor, so put your name down and your email address. So part of your response will actually be in the atrium when you leave. I want to make sure that we're covered in prayer. Let me take a moment and bring this all into focus. Because of this story, because of this victory that God gave the Israelites, they came to know God in a new way. In fact, on this day, they gave God a new name. Here it is. Exodus 7:15. Moses built an altar and called it, "The Lord is my banner." The Lord, all caps, Lord, Yahweh, banner, Nisi. They gave him a new name, Yahweh Nisi. The Lord is my banner. Now, a banner is used to identify people, like our flag. We all gather from different places, but we gather together under one flag. It's who we are as Americans. I have in my mind different war movies that I've seen, like The Patriot, where soldiers are coming carrying the flag. And as they carry the flag, you know, this is my side. This is who I'm fighting with. We identify ourselves with the flag. The Lord is my banner. Yahweh Nisi means we are the Lord's. A banner is also used to celebrate and to honor victories. I think about how banners have been raised in arenas after championships to honor those who have won championships and victories. The Israelites didn't win the battle because they had the greatest soldiers. They didn't win the battle because they had in Joshua the greatest military leader. They didn't win the battle even because of Moses, because he was the greatest spiritual leader. They didn't win the battle because of Aaron and Hur that were holding up his arms. Moses knew they won the battle because God fought for them. The Lord won the victory. And that's why he gave the name, the Lord is our banner, Yahweh Nisi. And let me tell you this, North Highlands. If God uses us to impact the world, it will not be because we have the greatest congregation. It will not be because we have the greatest spiritual leaders. It won't be because we have the greatest staff. It certainly won't be because we have the greatest pastor. But God will use this congregation to impact the world because he will do it for us. He will fight our battles. He will give us the victory. The Lord is our banner. Yahweh Nisi. See his banner wave. You see his banner lifted up when you look, when Yahweh came down to this earth and hung on a pole of a cross. That is where he won the victory. See him. See his blood pour down the cross that he willingly hung on. There as he paid the price for your sin. Jesus, as he was looking to this moment, said this. John 12:32, and I when I am lifted up from the earth, will draw all people to myself. See his banner wave. The Lord is my banner. Yahweh Nisi. I'll draw all men to myself. Maybe today as you see Jesus and think about what he has done for you, maybe today he's drawing you. If he is, I say this, trust him. Turn from your sin and yourself and your rebellion and living life your own way and place your faith in Jesus. Follow him as your Lord. He loved you so much, he came and died on the cross in your place. In just a moment, we're going to have an invitation, and I invite you first and foremost to Jesus. If you have questions about that, there are pastors, there are encouragers that would love nothing more than help you with that. Maybe today you are a Christian, you've placed your faith in Jesus. Maybe today you say, I proudly want to identify with a God like this. He's my banner. I want to make sure everybody knows. You might could do this personally. Last week we had an incredible picture of Brother Reggie following through in obedience through believers' baptism. Now understand, you may not have been confused by what happened. Brother Reggie's been a Christian for over 40 years, but he followed in obedience and was baptized last Sunday. Something he hadn't done after he became a Christian. Maybe you say, I want to identify. I want to raise the banner, Jehovah Nisi, I am the Lord's. And maybe you need to follow through in believers' baptism. Maybe you want to join corporately. The Lord is my banner. I want to join this team and join the church. Say, I'm joining my life to what's here at North Highlands. I'm on the team. We would love for you to be a part of that. Maybe today there are battles in your life, and through this story you know the Lord can fight your battles. He can give you victory. The victory comes on your knees.